Hi, welcome back to Salem's Lot. Assignment number 12. You know the deal. I'm going to read for 20. You answer your questions. Specifically, we are in part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream, chapter 11, Ben 4, part 10. So again, this assignment number 12 starts in part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream, chapter 11, Ben 4, 10. As always, please, no kids in the room, no kids around, please. This is a very mature book, and we want to keep everybody who doesn't belong out of the way until they get old enough to handle it. And then share all the Stephen King books you can. So let's go. Enjoy, please. Let's do assignment number 12. Things are definitely starting to heat up. Let's see what happens. 10. It was 5 to 7. Ben felt tension begin to seep into his body. Might as well stop staring at the clock, Jimmy said. You can't make it go any faster by looking at it. Ben started guiltily. I doubt very much that vampires, if they exist at all, rise at almanac sunset, Jimmy said. It's never full dark. Nonetheless, he got up and shut off the TV, catching a wood duck in mid-squawk. Silence descended on the room like a blanket. They were in Green's workroom, and the body of Marjorie Glick was on a stainless steel table equipped with gutters and foot stirrups that could be raised or depressed. It reminded Ben of the tables in hospital delivery rooms. Jimmy had turned back the sheet that covered her body when they entered and had made a brief examination. Mrs. Glick was wearing a burgundy-colored quilted housecoat and knitted slippers. There was a Band-Aid on her left shin, perhaps covering a shaving nick. Ben looked away from it, but his eyes were drawn back again and again. What do you think? Ben had asked. I'm not going to commit myself on another 3 hours. We'll probably decide one way or the other. But her condition is strikingly similar to that of Mike Ryerson. No surface lividity, no sign of rigor or incipient rigor. And he had pulled the sheet back and would say no more. It was 7:02. Jimmy suddenly said, Where's your cross? Ben started. Cross? Jesus, I don't have one. You were never a Boy Scout, Jimmy said, and opened his bag. I, however, always come prepared. He brought out 2 tongue depressors, stripped off the protective cellophane, and bound them together at right angles with a twist of Red Cross tape. Bless it, he said to Ben. What? I can't. I don't know how. Then make it up, Jimmy said, and his pleasant face suddenly appeared strained. You're the writer. You'll have to be the metaphysician. For Christ's sake, hurry. I think something is going to happen. Can't you feel it? And Ben could. Something seemed to be gathering in the slow purple twilight, unseen as yet, but heavy and electric. His mouth had gone dry, and he had to wet his lips before he could speak. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Then he added as an afterthought, in the name of the Virgin Mary, too, blessed his cross, and words rose to his lips with sudden, eerie surety. The Lord is my shepherd, he said, and the words fell into a shadowy rhythm, as stones would have fallen into a deep lake, sinking out of sight without a ripple. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Jimmy's voice joined his old chanting. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It seemed hard to breathe properly. Ben found that his whole body had crawled into goose flesh, and the short hairs on the nape of his neck had begun to prickle, as if they were rising into hackles. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall. The sheet covering Marjorie Glick's body had begun to tremble. A hand fell out below the sheet, and the fingers began to dance jaggedly on the air, twisting and turning. My Christ, am I seeing this? Jimmy whispered. His face had gone pale, and his freckles stood out like spatters on a window pane. Follow me all the days of my life, Ben finished. Jimmy, look at the cross. The cross was glowing. The light spilled over his hand in an elvish flood. A slow, choked voice spoke in the stillness, as grating as shards of broken crockery. Danny. Ben felt his tongue cleave to the roof of his mouth. The form under the sheet was sitting up. Shadows in the darkened room moved and slithered. Danny, where are you, darling? The sheet fell from her face and crumpled in her lap. The face of Marjorie Glick was a pallid moon-like circle in the semi-dark, punched only by the black holes of her eyes. She saw them, and her mouth jutted open in an awful, cheated snarl. The fading glow of daylight flashed against her teeth. She swung her legs over the side of the table. One of the slippers fell off and lay unheeded. Sit right there, Jimmy told her. Don't try to move. Her answer was a snarl, a dark silver sound, dog-like. She slid off the table, staggered, and walked toward them. Ben caught himself looking into those punched eyes and wrenched his gaze away. There were black galaxies shot with red in there. You could see yourself, drowning and liking it. Don't look in her face, he told Jimmy. They were retreating from her without thought, allowing her to force them toward the narrow hall which led to the stairs. Try the cross, Ben. He had almost forgotten he had it. Now he held it up, and the cross seemed to flash with brilliance. He had to squint against it. Mrs. Glick made a hissing, dismayed noise and threw her hands up in front of her face. Her features seemed to draw together, twitching and writhing like a nest of snakes. She tottered a step backward. "That's got her," Jimmy yelled. Ben advanced on her, holding the cross out before him. She hooked one hand into a claw and made a swipe at it. Ben dipped it below her hand and then thrust it at her. And a ululating scream came from her throat. For Ben, the rest took on a maroon tones of a nightmare. Although worse horrors were to come, the dreams of the following days and nights were always of driving Marjorie Glick back towards that mortician's table, where the sheet that had covered her lay crumpled beside one knitted slipper. I'd like to repeat that last sentence. Stephen King loves to give you really harsh foreshadowing, and that's like slap you in the face foreshadowing right there. Listen to what she just said. Although worse horrors were to come, and we know this because remember, this whole thing right now is a flashback. Remember, he's we're hearing the story. Remember, he was in Los Zapatos, Mexico, and whatnot, and then they had come back. So he's been through all this. We actually know Ben is going to survive, and the boy. Have we figured out who the boy is? I'm sure we have. But listen to this. Although worse horrors were to come, the dreams of the following days and nights were always of driving Marjorie Glick back toward that mortician's table, where the sheet that had covered her lay crumpled beside one knitted slipper. So just get ready. We know more bad. A lot worse is going to come. She retreated unwillingly, her eyes alternating between the hateful cross and an area on Ben's neck to the right of the chin. The sounds that were wrenched out of her were inhuman gibberings and hissings and glovels, and there was something so blindly reluctant in her withdrawal that she began to seem like some giant lumbering insect. Ben thought, if I don't have this cross out front, she would rip my throat open with her nails and gulp down the blood that splurted out of the jugular and carotid like a man just out of the desert and dying of thirst. She would bathe in it. Jimmy headed away from his side and was circling to the left. She didn't see him. Her eyes were fixed only on Ben, dark and filled with hatred, filled with fear. Jimmy circled the mortician's table, and when she backed around it, he threw both arms around her neck with a convulsive yell. She gave a high whistling cry and twisted in his grip. Ben saw Jimmy's nails pull away a flap of her skin at the shoulder, and nothing welled out. The cut was like a lipless mouth. And then incredibly, she threw him across the room. Jimmy crashed into the corner, knocking Maury Green's portable TV off its stand. She was on him in a flash, moving in a bunched, scrabbling run that was nearly spider-like. Ben caught a shadow, crawled glimpse of her falling on top of him, ripping at his collar, and then the sideward predatory lunge of her head, the yawning of her jaws as she battened on him. Jimmy Cody screamed, the high, despairing scream of the utterly damned. Ben threw himself at her, stumbling and nearly falling over the shattered television on the floor. He could hear her harsh breathing like the rattle of straw, and below that, the revolting sound of smacking, champing lips. He grabbed her by the collar of her housecoat and yanked her upward, forgetting the cross momentarily. Her head came around with frightening swiftness. Her eyes were dilated and glittering, her lips and chin slicked with blood that was black in this near total darkness. Her breath in his face was foul beyond measure, the breath of tombs. As if in slow motion, he could see her tongue lick across her teeth. He brought the cross up just as she jerked him forward into her embrace, her strength making him feel like something made of rags. The rounded point of the tongue depressor that formed the cross's downstroke struck her under the chin and then continued upward with no fleshly resistance. Ben's eyes were stunned by a flash of not light that happened not before his eyes, but seemingly behind them. There was this hot and porcine smell of burning flesh. Her scream this time was full-throated and agonized. He sensed rather than saw her throw herself backward, stumble over the television, and fall on the floor, one white arm thrown outward to break her fall. She was up again with wolf-like agility, her eyes narrowed in pain, yet still filled with her insane hunger. The flesh of her lower jaw was smoking and black. She was snarling at me. "Come on, you bitch," he panted. "Come on, come on." He held the cross out before him again and backed her into the corner at the far left of the room. When he got her there, he was going to her head. But as her back pressed the narrowing wall, she uttered a high, squealing giggle that made him wince. It was like the sound of a fork being dragged across a porcelain sink. Even now one laughs. Even now your circle is smaller. And before his eyes, her body seemed to elongate and become translucent. For a moment, he thought she was still there, laughing at him, and then the white glow of the street lamp outside was shining on bare wall, and there was only a fleeting sensation on his nerve endings, which seemed to be reporting that she had seeped into the very pores of the wall, like smoke. She was gone, and Jimmy was screaming. 11. He flicked on the overhead bar of fluorescence and turned to look at Jimmy, but Jimmy was already on his feet, holding his hands to the side of his neck. The fingers were sparkling scarlet. She bit me, Jimmy howled. Oh, God, Jesus, she bit me. Ben went to him, tried to take him in his arms, and Jimmy pushed him away. His eyes rolled madly in their sockets. Don't touch me. I'm unclean. Jimmy, give me my bag. Jesus, Ben, I can't feel it in there. I can feel it in there. I can feel it working in me. For Christ's sake, give me my bag. It was in the corner. Ben got it, and Jimmy snatched it. He went to the mortician's table and set the bag on it. His face was death pale, shining with sweat. The blood pulsed remorselessly from the torn gash in the side of his neck. He sat down on the table and opened the bag and swept through it, his breath coming in whining gasps through his open mouth. She bit me, he muttered into the bag. Her mouth, oh God, her dirty, filthy mouth. He pulled a bottle of disinfectant out of the bag and sent the cap spinning across the tiled floor. He leaned back, supporting himself on one arm, and upended the bottle over his throat, and it splashed the wounds, his slacks, the table. Blood washed away in threads. His eyes closed, and he screamed once, then again. The bottle never wavered. Jimmy, what can I? In a minute, Jimmy muttered. Wait, it's better, I think. Wait, just wait. He tossed the bottle away and it shattered on the floor. The wound, washed clean of the tainted blood, was clearly visible. Ben saw there was not one but two puncture wounds, not far from the jugular, one of them horribly mangled. Jimmy had pulled an ampoule bag from a hypo from the bag. Jimmy had pulled an ampoule and a hypo from the bag. He stripped the protective covering from the needle and jibbed it through the ampoule. His hands were shaking so badly he had to make 2 thrusts at it. He filled the needle and held it out to Ben. Tetanus, he said. Give it to me. Here. He held his arm out, rotated to expose the armpit. Jimmy, that'll knock you out. No, it won't. Do it. Ben took the needle and looked questioningly into Jimmy's eyes. He nodded. Ben injected the needle. Jimmy's body tensed like spring steel. For a moment, wait a minute, did he just shoot him in the armpit? Yeah. Tetanus, he said. Give it to me. Here. He held his arm out, rotated to expose the armpit. So, ow! That's like so sensitive, but it's very smart, I guess. I mean, he's the doctor, not me. Ben injected the needle. Jimmy's body tensed like spring steel. For a moment, he was a sculpture in agony, every tendon pulled out into sharp relief. Little by little, he began to relax. His body shuddered in reaction, and Ben saw that tears had mixed with the sweat on his face. Put the cross on me, he said. If I'm still dirty from her, it'll do something to me. Will it? I'm sure it will. When you were going after her, I looked up and I wanted to go after you. God help me, I did. And I looked at that cross and my belly wanted to heave up. Ben put the cross on his neck. Nothing happened. Its glow, if there had been a glow at all, was entirely gone. Ben took the cross away. Okay, Jimmy said. I think that's all we can do. He rummaged in his bag again, found an envelope containing 2 pills and crushed them into his mouth. Dope, he said. Great invention. Thank God I used the John before it happened. I think I pissed myself, but it only came to about 6 drops. Can you bandage my neck? I think so, Ben said. Jimmy handed him gauze, adhesive tape, and a pair of surgical scissors. Bending to put the bandage on, he saw that the skin around the wound had got an ugly, congealed red. Jimmy flinched when he pressed the bandage gently into place. He said, for a couple of minutes there, I thought I was going to go nuts, really clinically nuts. Her lips on me, biting me. His throat rippled as he swallowed. And when she was doing it, I liked it, Ben. That's the hellish part. I actually had an erection. Can you believe it? If you hadn't been here to pull her off, I would have let her. Never mind, Ben said. There's one more thing I have to do that I don't like. What's that? Here, look at me a minute. Ben finished the bandage and drew back a little look at Jimmy. What? And suddenly Jimmy slugged him. Stars rocketed up in his brains, and he took 3 wandering steps backward and sat down heavily. He shook his head and saw Jimmy getting carefully down from the table and coming toward him. He groped madly for the cross, thinking, this is what's known as an Owen Henry ending, you stupid shit. You stupid. You all right? Jimmy asked, asking him. I'm sorry, but it's a little easier when you don't know it's coming. What the Christ? Jimmy sat down beside him on the floor. I'm going to tell you our story, he said. It's a damned poor one, but I'm pretty sure Maury Green will back it up. It will keep my practice and keep us both out of jail or some asylum. And at this point, I'm not so concerned about those things as I'm about staying free to fight these things, whatever you want to call them, another day. Do you understand that? The thrust of it, Ben said. He touched his jaw and winced. There was a knot to the left of his chin. Somebody barged in on us while I was examining Mrs. Glick, Jimmy said. Somebody cold-cocked you and then used me for a punching bag. During the struggle, somebody bit me to make me let him go. That's all either of us remembers. All. Understand? Ben nodded. The guy was wearing a dark CPO coat, maybe blue, maybe black, and a green or gray knitted cap. That's all you saw, okay? Have you ever thought about giving up doctoring in favor of a career in creative writing? Jimmy smiled. I'm only creative in moments of extreme self-interest. Can you remember the story? Sure. And I don't think it's as poor as you might believe. After all, hers isn't the first body that disappeared lately. I'm hoping that they'll add that up. But the county sheriff is a lot more on the ball than Parkins Gillespie ever thought of being. We have to watch our step. Don't embellish the story. Do you suppose anyone in officialdom will begin to see the pattern in all this? Jimmy shook his head. Not a chance in the world. We're going to have to humble through this on our own. And remember that from this point on, we're criminals. Shortly after, he went to the phone and called Maury Green, then County Sheriff Homer McCaskillin. Ben got back to Eva's at about 15 minutes past midnight and made himself a cup of coffee in the deserted downstairs kitchen. He drank it slowly, reviewing the night's events with all an intense recall of a man who has just escaped from a high ledge. County Sheriff was a tall, balding man. He chewed tobacco. He moved slowly, but his eyes were bright with observation. He had pulled an enormous battered notebook on a chain from his hip pocket and an old thick-barreled fountain pen from under his green wool vest. He had questioned Ben and Jimmy while two deputies dusted for fingerprints and took pictures. Maury Green stood quietly in the background, throwing a puzzled look at Jimmy from time to time. What had brought them to Green's mortuary? Jimmy took that one, reciting the encephalitis story. Did old Doc Reardon know about it? Well, no. Jimmy thought it would be best to make a quiet check before mentioning it to anyone. Doc Reardon had to be, Doc Reardon had been known to be, overly chatty on occasion. What about this encephalitis? Did the woman have it? No, almost certainly not. He had finished his examination before the men in the CPO coat burst in. He, Jimmy, would not be willing or able to state just how the woman had died, but it certainly wasn't of encephalitis. Did they describe this fellow? They answered in terms of the story they had worked out. Ben added a pair of brown work boots just so they wouldn't sound too much like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. McCaskillin asked a few more questions, and Ben was just beginning to feel that they were going to get out of this unscathed when McCaskillin turned to him and asked, "What are you doing in this, Mears? You ain't no doctor." His watchful eyes twinkled benignly. Jimmy opened his mouth to answer, but the sheriff quieted him with a single-hand gesture. If the purpose of McCaskillin's sudden shot had been to startle Ben into a guilty expression or gesture, it failed. He was too emotionally wrung out to react much. Being caught in a misstatement did not seem too shattering after what had gone before. I'm a writer, not a doctor. I write novels. I'm writing one currently, and one of the important secondary characters is a mortician's son. I just wanted to look into the back room. I hitched a ride with Jimmy here. He told me he would rather not reveal his business, and I didn't ask. He rubbed his chin where a small knotted bump had risen. I got more than I bargained for. McCaskillin looked neither pleased nor disappointed in Ben's answer. I should say you did. You're the fellow that wrote Conway's daughter, ain't you? Yes. My wife read part of that in some woman's magazine, Cosmopolitan, I think. Laughed like hell. I took a look and couldn't see nothing funny in the little girl strung out on drugs. No, Ben said, looking McCaskillin in the eye. I didn't see anything funny about it either. This new book, the one they say you've been working on, up to the lot? Yes. Perhaps you like Mo Green here to read it over, McCaskillin remarked. See if you got the undertaken parts right. That section isn't written yet, Ben said. I always research before I write. It's easier. McCaskillin shook his head wonderingly. You know, your story sounds just like one of those Fu Manchu books. Some guy breaks in here and overpowers two strong men and makes off with the body of some poor woman who died of unknown causes. Listen, Homer, Jimmy began. Don't you Homer me, McCaskillin said. I don't like it. I don't like any part of it. This encephalitis is catching, ain't it? Yes, it's infectious, Jimmy said warily. And you still brought this writer along, knowing she might be infected with something like that? Jimmy shrugged and looked angry. I don't question your professional judgment, Sheriff. You'll just have to bear with mine. Encephalitis is a fairly low-grade infection which gains slowly in the human bloodstream. I felt there would be no danger to either of us. Now, wouldn't you be better off trying to find out who carted away Mrs. Glick's body, Fu Manchu or otherwise, or are you just having fun questioning us? McCaskillin fetched a deep sigh from his not inconsiderable belly, flipped his notebook closed, and stored it in the depths of his hip pocket again. Well, we'll put the word out, Jimmy. Doubt if we'll get much on this unless the kook comes out of the woodwork again. If there ever was a kook, which I doubt. Jimmy raised his eyebrows. You're lying to me, McCaskillin said patiently. I know it. These deputies know it. Probably even old Mo knows it. I don't know how much you're lying, a little or a lot, but I know I can't prove you're lying as long as you both stick to the same story. I can take you both down to the cool. The rules say I got to give you one phone call, and even the greenest kid fresh out of law school could spring you on what I got, which could best be described as the suspicion of unknown hanky-panky. And I bet your lawyer ain't fresh out of law school, is he? No, Jimmy said. He's not. I'd take you down just the same and put you to the inconvenience, except I got a feeling you ain't lying because you did something against the law. He hit the pedal at the foot of the stainless steel waste can by the mortician's table. The top banged up, and McCaskillin shot a brown streak of tobacco juice into it. Maury Green jumped. Would either of you like to sort of revise your story? He asked quietly, and the backcountry twang was gone from his voice. It's a serious business. We've got 4 deaths in the lot, and all 4 bodies are gone. I want to know what's happening. I told you everything we know, Jimmy said with quiet firmness. He looked directly at McCaskill. If we could tell you more, we would. McCaskill looked back at him just as keenly. You're scared shitless, he said. You and this writer, both of you. You look the way some of the guys in Korea looked when they brought him back from the front lines. The deputies were looking at them. Ben and Jimmy said nothing. McCaskill sighed again. Go on, get out of here. I want you both down to my office tomorrow by 10 to make statements. If you ain't there by 10, I'll send a patrol car out to get you. You won't have to do that, Ben said. McCaskill looked at him mournfully and shook his head. You ought to write books with better sense, like the guy who writes those Travis McGee stories. A man can sink his teeth into one of those stories. Hold on 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. 13. I'm sorry. Like one of those Travis McGee stories. A man can sink his teeth into one of those. 13. Ben got up from the tab and rinsed his coffee cup at the sink, pausing to look out the window into the night's blackness. What was out there tonight? Marjorie Glick, reunited with her son at last, Mike Ryerson, Floyd Tibbetts, Carl Foreman. He turned away and went upstairs. He slept the rest of the night with the desk lamp on and left the tongue depressor cross that had vanquished Mrs. Glick on the table by his right hand. His last thought before sleep took him was to wonder if Susan was all right and safe. All right, so this is a lovely place for me to stop, and you are now in a new chapter. You are now in Mark, not Ben anymore. So you are now going to pick it up where it is part 2. It's still part 2. It's just a different chapter. So we're in part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream, chapter 12, Mark. And you're going to go to 1. Again, where we are in the novel, where you're going to pick it up tonight or today, whenever you read it. Part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream, chapter 12, Mark. And you're going to be at 1. And enjoy. Have a lovely day. I am excited to talk to you about what happens in this part, what you're going to read right now, tomorrow. And that's it. Enjoy. Make sure you answer all the way up. Assignment number 12 is 17 questions. Get up to number 17 and have a lovely day.